Okay, hi everyone, Mr. Ridley here. I've been asked to give you one of the CFS baccalaureates, I've been asked to give you a lecture or a chat or just some information around the Tour de France. I feel really honoured that Mrs. Hill has asked me to do this. Tour de France and cycling in general is something that I really love. I'm not confessing to be an expert in everything about the Tour de France, but I think it's quite good if I can just have a chat around certain things like the history of it, about how the race is set up, a bit of the science behind it, a bit about some memorable moments. There's been some crazy moments in the Tour de France over the years. So I'm just going to give a bit of an insight into it, really, into probably what I would consider as to be the greatest sporting spectacle. Um, of modern time, really. It's something that I really enjoy watching, and maybe after this it might spark your interest, and you might even have a look at the 2021 tour and see what you think about it as well. So the birth of the tour. So you can see there the picture on the right hand. This was from the very first tour that was taken, and it was taken place in 1903, and it's created by Henry Desgrange and Georges Lefebvre. Now, basically, what they were is that Henry Desgrange was the editor of the L'Auto, which is a sports magazine, and Georges Lefebvre, he was the cycling and rugby reporter. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to improve the publicity of the publication, and they wanted to improve the circulation around France. So what they thought they would do is that they would set up a 6-stage race around France, to promote the magazine, basically. And the first event, it was a 6-stage race, and it was over 2,428 kilometres. And as I say, it was to do with improving the publicity and the circulation of the newspaper. Now, they didn't really know what they did. They didn't set out to start the Tour de France. They set out to sell more newspapers, to sell more magazines. But actually, from 1903 to this day, it's been held annually, every single year. We have had to stop for 2 world wars for obvious reasons, but all throughout the time, the Tour de France has taken place, and it is a huge, huge event, worldwide event, but it's a huge event in France. If any of you have travelled to France, either just before the Tour de France or just after, you will see going through the French villages and the French towns, the amount of decoration, the amount of writing on the roads, it's unbelievable. And I talk from a personal experience, because in 2014 I was lucky enough to complete the Tour de France. I wasn't racing, I did it for charity to raise some money with me and someone who I used to cycle with a lot, and we cycled the Tour de France, and it is the hardest thing that I have ever done. And the toughness, the mental resilience of professional cyclists to do it at the pace that they do it, to the intensity, to the amount of preparation, and how they sacrifice their life basically for this event, is unbelievable. And it was one of the greatest things that I've ever done. And through it, I have made a reference to a couple of the stages of the 2014 tour. But again, this is not about me, this is about the tour. So yeah, so it was in 1903, and it was I think it was created by accident, really. They didn't really know what they were doing. They just, like I said, they just wanted to sell more magazines. But it was from 1903, 6-stage race, to what it is today. So how does actually the Tour de France work? Well, it's split over 21 stages. So the Tour de France lasts for 23 days. Now, within that, there are 2 rest days. And the rest days are there for obvious reasons, because the calorie expenditure, just a sheer physical and mental strain it puts on the racers, they need to have those 2 rest days put in there. It covers around 2,200 miles. So on average, cyclists, the professional riders, are doing over 100 miles, 110 miles plus a day. Okay, so you can imagine the toll that takes on the body. Now, it's not just all the same terrain as they are cycling. They are cycling over different terrains, and you can see here that I've put here that over the 21 stages, so they've classed them as 9 flat stages. Now please don't think that where it says a flat stage in the Tour de France is, as it says, a flat stage. It is incredibly lumpy and bumpy, and there are hills, and it is extremely difficult. There are 3 hillier stages, so this is as you're entering the mountain stage. So this is where you'll have a number of categorised climbs in there, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And then you've got 7 mountain stages. Now that is where it's really, really tough cycling, and this is towards the end of the race as well. So you may have done already well over 1,000 miles of racing already, and then you hit the mountain stages, which is just super difficult. And then interspersed within that, they have time trials. Now time trial is basically the clock goes and you've got to get from point A to point B as quickly as you can, and they'll do that twice, and they'll do it for one team. So the team will be, and you may have seen this, where they're all in a line and they're all aerodynamic, and they keep switching the lead rider. So when you're out on the front, you're actually going as quickly as you can. Everyone tucks in behind, because they say you use probably about 30% less energy when you're tucked in behind someone. In triathlon, it's called drafting, and it's actually, you're not allowed to do it in triathlon events, but it's totally fine for the Tour de France. And the teams will practice and practice and practice, because it's an absolute skill to get that right. And then there is also an individual time trial, where the cyclists will set off one by one, and they will get from point A to point B as quickly as they can, and the distance of the time trials is often a lot shorter than the stages that I've just previously mentioned. And also what you'll notice about the time trial and the individual time trial is that the equipment they use is different. So they might use disc wheels where you can't see the spokes, it's just full black carbon discs to make it even more aerodynamic. They'll have time trial bars at the front of their handlebars, so they can actually get into a much more tucked position, so they are more aerodynamic. And all of those things are not just done by chance and just a one-off. There has been hours and hours of research and painstaking failures by the research teams to get the cyclists, to get the riders in the most aerodynamic position, to make them the most efficient they can be. Therefore they're going to be the quickest they can be, therefore they've got a greater chance of winning. Now within the Tour, it's really odd, because there is actually almost a race within the race, if this makes sense. So there'll be many teams that will arrive, and they will have a GC rider. Now GC is a general classification rider. That is the #1 person. And I'll talk about that later in the presentation. But they are going for, their aim is to go for the maillot jaune. This is the yellow jersey. This is the coveted yellow jersey. This is what the riders want, okay? But within it as well, you've also got the polka dot jersey. Now this is for the King of the Mountains, which I'll explain in a moment. You've also got the green jersey. This is for the sprinters, and you have got the white jersey for the best young rider, okay? So there'll be some teams that will be going to win the green jersey. There'll be some teams that will be going to win the polka dot jersey. What you won't have, and I'm not, you won't have a team that will be wanting to win all 4. They'll be focusing just on one, just because of the sheer physical output that it takes to win one of these, and the tactics. It's an incredibly tactical race. So in terms of the maillot jaune, this is the person who basically completes the race in the quickest time. Now they might not always win the stage, but they can extend their lead from their opponent if they are behind them in that stage. So don't think that if you're not first in terms of on the stage that you lose the maillot jaune. Not always the case. Now if we take the green jersey to start with here, okay, this is for the sprinters. Now the sprinters, they will be going over the flat stages, okay, and within the flat stages there will be different points where you can gather sprinting points, okay. So they will race within that race. So the general classification, the GC riders, they're not interested in that at all. Okay, they're not interested in the points. Okay, but the sprinters, so your Mark Cavendish, etc., they want to accumulate the most points as possible over those flat stages to have the green jersey. Now, what they have to do as well is, so they have to also get over the hilly stages and also the mountain stages, and the build, the actual physical build of the sprinters, they're usually much heavier. I'll say much heavier. These are still, they're absolutely supreme athletes, but they're more heavily muscled than you would have for your King of the Mountains. These are very, very slight athletes. You know, you're talking 50 kg, 55 kg. You know, these are very, very slight athletes with a huge aerobic capacity. So these find the stages of the Tour, the latter stages, very, very difficult. Now, in terms of the King of the Mountains, it works on the same principle. It works basically on the same principle that there will be different points where you'll pick up King of the Mountains points at a different climb. So if you get to the top of the summit first before your opponent, you will gain the points, and so on and so forth. And this one here, this one is given in terms of the best young rider. That's given just in terms of where they stand in the overall standings. They will win the white jersey. There isn't essentially points in the race for the younger riders. It's just where the youngest rider finishes. That's where the white jersey comes from. So it's really interesting how there is a race within a race, and there are teams going for different things. What I would say is as well is in terms of how it's quite a unique event, because it's probably one of the only sports that I can think of where you will have two teams who are racing against each other will actually be working together to get over the line the quickest first. Because if you're in a breakaway group on a flat stage, and there may be 6 of them in the breakaway group, they will be all from different teams. They will be, as I've talked about the time trial, they will be using each other to have to spend time at the front of the line and then breaking off and to get away from the peloton. And then they will fight it out to get over the line first. So it's a bit of an oddity really, that you're kind of working together to get away from it, and then you fight it out at the end. But I've just put the question: is it all for the maillot jaune? And you can see there that it's not. Okay, but it is a huge event where there are races within a race. Okay, so in terms of like the structure, there's usually around 20 to 22 professional teams there. Team Sky, now Team Ineos, that's probably the most famous. It's headed up by Dave Brailsford, and many of you may have heard about Marginal Gains that he's brought in. And each team within there will have 8 riders. Now the top teams, as I said before, they will have a GC rider. That person aim is to win that yellow jersey. But within the team there's different roles, and they've put there about domestiques. Now the domestique, they work for the benefit of the team. So what you do is you do absolutely everything you can to make sure that your GC rider gets over the line first and wins that yellow jersey. And again, this is another oddity about the Tour de France, how you can be a domestique and you can work and work and work, and you can you can be the person that the GC rider tucks in behind for miles and miles and miles and miles, and you can put in so much effort, but you don't get the plaudits at the end. You don't get the praise and the recognition from the media, from the general public. What you get is that you see your success by your GC rider getting that yellow jersey. And I find that a little bit strange. The domestique will go back to the support vehicle. They will get loaded up with water bottles. You know, you may have seen footage of like a cyclist with maybe 20 water bottles shoved down their jersey, going back to the peloton, handing them out to all the team. Absolutely the unsung heroes of the cycling team. Also, they have like the lead out man. So for the sprinters, so you have somebody who is a top class sprinter. Will be leading out the sprinter in the final stages, so they can catapult them forward. So again, it's about use of aerodynamics. There is a cut-off time, so you have to get over the line in a certain point, rather than just whenever you like. There has to be some cut-off points, and some riders don't make that, and some get sent home. The winner of the stage does not always get to wear the yellow jersey. That all depends on time, okay? And tactically, you don't want to be in yellow too early. It's a big responsibility. You don't want to be in the yellow jersey too early. So the top teams will start looking about wanting to dominate at the end of end of week 2, halfway through week 2. About being in yellow, and then the riders protect that GC rider however they can to get them over the line. Okay, I just want to talk to you now around what the flat stage would look like. We talked earlier around the flat stage and not being, as it says in the title, a flat stage. You'll notice there that you can see it's quite lumpy and bumpy, and you've got some numbers and a letter there, and I'll explain those in a moment. So as I said to you before, in 2014 this was one of the stages, this is one of the flat stages. I think this was from the Grand Depart, the first stage if I remember correctly, up in Leeds to Harrogate this was. So you can see there, cycle 126 miles, and they class this as a flat stage, but you can see there's a series of lumps and bumps there with numbers. Now what those numbers signify is the categorization of the climbs. In the next slide I'll show you what a mountain stage looks like, and you'll see the difference in terms of the numbers. But on this particular picture here, you've got category 4 and category 3 climbs. Now what that means is that when a climb is categorized, 4 is the easiest. Okay, but please don't think it is easy. I'll give you some context around that. If you think about maybe George's Lane, or in Calverton, or you've got Bank Hill and Bonner Hill, okay, they wouldn't be categorized in the Tour de France. Okay, so you think about how difficult it is to get up on a bike there, and some of you may have done that. That's not the type of climb that we're looking at. But you can see here, this is the one in 2014 that I cycled, and you can see the Buttertubs there as a category 3 climb. That is a tough climb, and it's so early on, and I'll talk about how they categorise the climbs in a moment, but that was so early on. That was a very, very tough climb. So you can see there, so this would be a sprinter stage. So the sprinters will be able to get over these lumps and bumps and finish in Harrogate with a sprint finish. Now interestingly, you can see there that there's a green S there. Now what that is that is a sprinting point. That's where you collect the sprint points. So the sprinters will be wanting to be first over at New Biggin. They'd want to be first over the line there to collect the maximum amount of points. And each in those 9 flat stages, that's where the sprinters will be collecting their points in order for them to win the green jersey. When they come down the Champs-Élysées in Paris at the end, they will know that they've accumulated enough points during those flat stages to win the green jersey. And the same in the mountain stages with the King of the Mountains. So you can see there, that's a flat stage with still some categorised climbs in it. Okay, and what we'll talk about in a moment, we'll talk about what does a mountain stage look like. Okay, so as I just previously mentioned about the flat stage, you can see the difference already. You can see the difference in terms of this is what a mountain stage will look like. And again, this is from the 2014 tour, and I don't know, it's just it's easy for me to talk about because of having personal experience there, but I can vividly remember this stage. You can see that there are a number of numbers in there, and they are mainly 1s and 2s. Okay, now what's that? That's a category 1 climb, category 2. I can see the Col de Croix. There's a category 3 climb, and I can remember that category 3 climb, and I can remember thinking to myself, it's okay, it's only a category 3 climb. It was absolutely ridiculous in terms of how difficult it was, but you can see the gradient, you can see the length of the climb, and you can see the sheer number of climbs. And when I finished on La Planche de Belleville, you know, it's an exhilarating experience, because it's ultimately, if you can imagine, it's almost like it's a ski resort. It's on the top of a mountain. We do it in the summer. There's no snow there. It's just grass. But you've got the cable cars and the ski lifts and everything. It's quite an odd landscape. But the climbing that day is really, really intense. And again, I'll talk about energy expenditure later on, but you can see that how different the stages look and how they categorize them. And I'll go on to talk about how we categorize a climb in a moment. Okay, you can basically categorize it from Cat 1 to Cat 4. So Cat 1 is the most difficult, and a Cat 4 is the easiest. Okay, and anything below that would be classed as a flat stage. They also use beyond category, so that's for when you're in the Alps. Huge mountains. So I might be wrong here, but I think Mont Ventoux is beyond category. I could be wrong there though. That's probably one of the most difficult climbs in cycling. So they're categorised, and so the question is, well, how do they categorise them? How do they decide which is a Cat 1 and which is the Cat 4, which is beyond category? And what they look at here is they look at the steepness, so the gradient. They look at the length of the climb and the location within the stage. So is it at the beginning of the stage or is it near the end? And they also look at the location within the overall race. So what you could have a Cat 1 climb that actually isn't that long in terms of length, but the gradient is pretty steep, but it is at the end of maybe stage 16 or 17, and it's at the end of that stage as well, so it will be a Cat 1 climb. And what happens here tactically, what the teams will do is they will do a recce of that every single stage, so the riders will know exactly what's coming up when, and quite often they will video the climbs for them, and they will train the climbs as well. Getting the climbs right is so important, and protecting your GC rider, almost pulling them up, is absolutely critical to get them up and over the climb. And again, this is where the Kings of the Mountains jersey comes in, the polka dot jersey. This is where they will be going over the line and wanting to gain as many mountain as possible. So we've already said it's 2,200 miles long. There's 21 stages. There's categorized climbs. So we're talking about we've got to fuel the body. We've got to this machine has got to have enough fuel in it to get us through the 3 weeks of racing. Okay, and what we're saying is you're burning around 5,000 to 8,000 calories every single stage. Okay, that's not inclusive of, just by the amount you burn throughout the day. That's just during that stage. So if it's a particularly difficult stage, you're going to burn more. And if we put that into perspective, your professional marathon runner per marathon will use about 5,000 calories. These riders, these guys are doing this day in, day out. These guys are incredibly tough athletes. Okay. So they have to get the food into them. And how do they do that? Well, there's feed zones placed around the stage, and there are people called the team representatives, and these carry mozettes. Now these are feed bags, and in there they'll have energy gels, they'll have rice cakes in there, they'll have high carbohydrate snacks for the riders, and each rider will have the specific snacks tailored to them. It's not just a case of, like you're at Colonel Frank Sealy, and it's like you go on a school trip and everyone gets a packed lunch. Everyone gets the same thing. It's not that at all. There are chefs in these top teams that are gearing the nutritional intake and the energy intake for these riders to exactly what they need, whether they're the GC rider, whether they're domestique, whether they're going for King of the Mountains, whether they're a sprinter. Everyone needs a different energy balance, and this is what they do really, really well. So it's incredibly scientific. But you'll see them; they're almost like cloth bags, and they might be at the top of a climb, they might be at the bottom of a climb, and the team reps have them there, and the riders know when to grab them, and then they can. And what you'll find in cycling jerseys is there's pockets at the back, and they will just stuff the food in there, and they'll take on board the fuel when they need it. But the critical thing about doing anything like this is you must not get behind on your eating. So your average person, like I was when I cycled it, your body starts to reject the food because you're working so hard, and it's really quite an unpleasant experience, almost like you feel like you're going to vomit. But you've got to get that fuel into you, otherwise you get into a deficit, you start losing weight, you start losing muscle, you start losing energy, and you won't continue. And just talking from personal experience, it's some of the toughest cycling that I've ever done. and especially in the latter stages in France, I found very difficult. So, whilst I love the Tour de France and I love cycling, it has a tarnished image. It really does. The use of performance-enhancing drugs over the years for the Tour has absolutely tarnished an incredible sport. There have been systematic doping programs run by probably all professional teams. Dave Brailsford would argue that Sky have no doping issues whatsoever. But all like Astana, etc., have got a very checkered past in terms of using performance-enhancing drugs. Probably the most famous is Lance Armstrong, and you've probably heard of Lance Armstrong. He won 7 titles. He's had them all now stripped from Tour de France, but he did that through systematic doping, and he did it. I remember he did it, and he beat cancer as well. And he had the Livestrong brand through Nike. And everyone was wearing those yellow bands. I don't know if you're too young for that. And as growing up, you know, in terms of Lance Armstrong and in my enjoyment of cycling, he was an absolute hero to me, and absolutely gutted when I found out that, you know, this is what he'd been doing, and it wasn't actually him in terms of his performance. Now, the drugs that they use, generally they'll use EPO. Now, what EPO does, it just increases the red blood cell count in your blood to make your body more efficient in terms of moving the oxygen around, the fuel around your body. Testosterone is used in terms of strength, growth, etc. And many others that they use, and some that we won't even know about yet, because they use drugs to mask the performance-enhancing drugs in the system, because they obviously have like a doping checks both on and off season, and the cyclists will be taking the drugs to mask the performance-enhancing drugs within the system. Now, in terms of the image today, it's probably the cleanest it's ever been. However, there still will be, I guarantee, there still will be doping issues at the next Tour de France. Really famous one, Tommy Simpson. There's a plaque to him, and if you've ever cycled up Mont Ventoux, you can see it. He basically in 1967. He was a British cyclist. He headed up the British team, and he died whilst going up there. Basically, the famous words were, "Put me back on my bike." This is the mindset of these guys. They are absolutely such tunnel vision to do and to race. But unfortunately, he'd taken a mixture of amphetamines, and he had alcohol in his system, and he basically had a heart attack 1k from the summit of Mont Ventoux. And the reason why that's so famous is because that then led to much tighter doping controls within the sport. His mechanic begged him not to get back on the bike because he could see he was in such a mess, and his words were, "Put me back on my bike," and that was ultimately to his death. And there's a picture of him there. So, advancements in technology. Okay, this was from the first ever one in 1903. You can see here, compared to what we're looking at today, we've got no gears at all. We've got wooden rims, so actually cycling on wood. You've got a steel frame, and the steel frame will be about 18 kilograms. Okay, I can't see any brakes there, so that's an interesting one. And I can't see anywhere for the cyclist to be holding any kind of nutrition, any water, anything like that, I assume in this bag here. Comparing that across here to what the top riders will use, these are about 12 to 15,000 pounds. Okay, so an awful lot of money. And you can see they've got the carbon disc, they've got the disc brakes, they've got the water bottle, they've got it'd be super light. Okay, so the advancements in technology from where they were to where we are now are absolutely huge. But it's not also just about the technology, it's also about how they prepare for the race, but also how the cyclists race the race, if that makes sense, in terms of the tactics that are used. Now the Tour, just by the very nature of it, there's some crazy moments of the Tour. We talked earlier in the presentation around doping. Chris Froome, who was very famous then Team Sky rider, he's had urine thrown on him because they claim it's a drugs cheat. All sorts of things have happened, and I've tried to think around 6 or 7 that stand out for me in terms of crazy moments. So the first one there I've got, this is punched in the kidney. That's Eddy Merckx. He's a cyclist from Belgium, and he was a very, very famous cyclist. He has a cycling brand named after him. You can buy Merckx bikes. And in 1975, he was the GC rider, and he was a clear favourite, and he was going up a climb, and because the spectators are so close to the riders, a spectator ran out and punched Eddy Merckx right into the kidneys, so hard in fact that he was vomiting. But again, the absolute mental toughness, physical toughness, the tenacity of these cyclists. He got to the top of the climb, he won the stage, and then he cycled back down the mountain, pointed out the person that had assaulted him, had punched him, and let the authorities deal with him. No, this wouldn't happen in any other sport, and it wouldn't happen in this day and age. The other one, Cycling and Dogs Don't Mix, in 2007 Tour, someone's pet dog escaped from the garden, got out, and just caused absolute carnage with the peloton. Bizarrely, lots of riders fell, some serious injuries, broken collarbones. The dog was totally fine. We think we'll just take a seat. So this refers to, and we've talked about doping, this returns to Team Festina in 1998. Huge doping controversy around the middle to late 90s. And basically the French authorities, the police, were coming to arrest the entire team, and they just would not get off the team bus. So they said, we will stay, we will take a seat, and we're just not going to move. And there was a standoff. And again, the world's media were absolutely had their eyes on this team for all the wrong reasons, but again, you know, very extreme incident, and you wouldn't get that in any other sport. Riding through hayfields, this was again a fallen hero of mine, Lance Armstrong. He basically cut a cord, he fell off, he basically veered off the road, and there's a really famous clip, and if you ever stick it onto YouTube, you can see him just cut the corner through this hayfield to catch back up the lead rider. It's quite an unbelievable piece of footage there. Candy from a Baby, this is Jens Voigt. Now he doesn't cycle anymore, he's retired, but he was absolutely hard as nails, this athlete. He was tough as they come. He used to talk about, you know, making the legs scream. That's how, you know, he'd put so much effort in. And basically he had a very, very nasty fall, smashed, fractured eye sockets, etc. But still got up and still rode the 12 miles and still beat his opponent, which was unbelievable. Taking a train, I researched this one. But it started, as you remember, it started in 1903. Okay, this was in 1904 when they did it. They ran it for the second year, and somebody decided, well, we'll cut a bit of time out of there and we'll take the train. So they took train for part of one of the stages. So they cheated. Again, you wouldn't get that this day and age. And what a thing to be thinking of. To think, I know how I'm going to win. I'm going to win by taking the train. So yeah, interesting. And then the final one is, and I remember this vividly, and this was unbelievable to watch. This is Chris Froome. He was at the bottom of a climb, or sorry, partway through a climb, and had an accident. There was a collision, and he came off his bike. From falling off his bike, there was a mechanical issue. There was none of the domestiques around him, because sometimes these guys just go off. There was no support vehicle there with a spare bike. He had no other option but to basically get his bike, get himself, and run up the climb. I think if any of you are interested, it'd be really good just to put some of these into YouTube, just to have a look at what these athletes and these crazy moments are like. I hopefully I've sparked some of your interest there in terms of the Tour de France. Please tune in and have a watch. By all means, come and have a chat with me around anything I've said today. And I could have talked